I woke up at 2:47 a.m. for no good reason, the way I always do. No alarm, no nightmare, just my eyes opening to the dark ceiling of my Tucson apartment, like my body had decided sleep was a finished product, and it was time to move on. I lay there for about 30 seconds, staring at the slow spin of the ceiling fan, then gave up and swung my legs off the bed. The kitchen light was harsh. I squinted through it, filled my old steel pot with water, and set it on the burner. Coffee. The real kind, not the pod stuff. I had learned in the army that if you were going to be awake when you did not want to be, you might as well have something worth drinking. I was leaning against the counter, waiting for the water to boil, when I heard it. A hum, low and steady, like a transformer doing something it should not be doing inside my wall. I straightened up. The sound was not coming from the wall. It was coming from the corner of my bedroom, near the closet door. I set down my mug, moved to the doorway, and looked in. The air near the closet was doing something that air is not supposed to do. It was folding. Light was bending around a vertical point, thin and bright, like someone had drawn a line with a pen that only worked on reality. Then the line widened, and she stepped through it. She was tall, maybe 6.5 feet. Her skin was smooth and pale, somewhere between gray and white, and it was glowing very faintly in slow-moving patterns of blue and green, like light moving under still water. She had 4 fingers on each hand, large dark eyes that reflected my kitchen light like polished glass, and a face that was almost human, the way a sketch of a face is almost a person. She was wearing something like a pressure suit, dark and close-fitting, and the suit was destroyed, burned through in 2 places on her left side. Long tears across the right shoulder, deep marks that I recognized immediately because I had seen similar ones before, on soldiers who had been in places where things with claws were a real concern. She was breathing in short, careful intervals. She was holding her left side with her right hand, and she was looking at me with those black mirror eyes, with an expression that I did not have a word for, but understood immediately, as someone who has run out of other options. The sound came not from her mouth, but arrived in my skull, the way a word does when you read it, complete and clear. Human, will you help me? I looked at her for a long moment. Then, I looked at the place on her suit, where the blue was not a glow, but a leak, running slow and dark down her left side. You're bleeding, I said. She blinked once, slowly, like she had prepared for many possible human responses, and this specific one had not been on the list. Yes, she said, I am. Sit down, I said. Not on the carpet. Kitchen. There's a chair. She followed me, moving carefully, one hand still pressed to her side. I pulled the chair out, and she sat in it, and I crouched down to look at the damage on her suit. Close up, it was worse. The material of the suit was some kind of weave I had never seen before, and it had been melted rather than cut, which told me whatever hit her had been energy-based. The wound itself was not like anything in my training, but the basic problem was clear enough. Something had opened a gap in her, and the inside of her was coming out. She reached into a sealed pocket on the inner lining of her suit with careful fingers and produced a small flat device, slightly warm, which she held out to me. This will help you understand enough, she said, about my biology, enough not to cause additional harm. I took it. The moment it made contact with my palm, information arrived in my head in a way I cannot properly explain, the same way the translation had arrived, except this was not words. It was understanding, I knew, suddenly and clearly, that her circulatory system did not work on pressure the way mine did, but on a kind of internal differential, and that standard compression would push the wrong direction and make things worse. I also understood, in the same strange instant, that the tissue around the wound needed to be sealed from the outside, while the internal pressure was simultaneously maintained. I stood up and went to my cabinet. I had lived alone for 4 years since leaving the service, and I had kept most of my practical habits from that time. I had a drone repair kit with thermal bonding adhesive. I had a blood pressure cuff. I had a vacuum seal bag meant for storing coffee. I had medical tape and a pair of surgical scissors I had never gotten around to returning to the base medical kit I had technically borrowed from in 2019. I worked. She watched me with those glass dark eyes, not making a sound, while I cut and shaped and pressed and sealed. It took 22 minutes. When I was done, the blue had stopped moving. "Where did you learn that adaptation?" she asked. "I didn't," I said, washing my hands at the sink. "I worked it out while I was doing it." A pause. "That is not typical," she said, "for a species at your developmental stage." "I once stitched a man's shoulder closed with a sewing kit and a prayer," I said. "You work with what you have. What's your name?" "Vale Siri," she said. "Marcus," I said. "What happened to you, and what do you actually need?" She told me. She told me in that same clear, careful way, with the translation arriving already formed in my head, and I listened without interrupting, which seemed to surprise her. She was a xenobiologist and observer, part of something called the Concord of Reach, a broad agreement between spacefaring civilizations. She had been stationed near Earth, studying us, for 6 years. Earth was classified as a quarantine species, a world the Concord had decided was too unpredictable to introduce to wider contact. She was not supposed to be here. She was not supposed to be standing in my kitchen. But she had been escorting a diplomatic shuttle carrying a political figure, and the shuttle had been attacked by a group called the Severance, which believed worlds like mine should be permanently sealed off, and wanted the attack to succeed, to make that argument louder. The political figure's emergency beacon was still transmitting. The Severance ship was still in orbit, looking for it. If they found it before help arrived, the figure would not survive, and neither would the argument for any future where Earth was treated as something other than a problem to be locked away. She needed me to drive to where her scout ship had gone down in the desert, 12 kilometers out, and retrieve a device that would mask the beacon. She could not do it herself in her current condition. "I understand if you refuse," she said, at the end of it. "This is not your conflict." I looked at the claw marks on her suit. I thought about what she had just described. Something happening in the sky above Tucson that would shape what happened to 8 billion people, being decided by people who had never spoken to a single one of them. "Get in the truck," I said. We drove out into the desert at 4 in the morning, with her navigating from the back seat, her glow turned down to nothing, the two of us quiet for a stretch, while the city fell behind us, and the stars came out properly, the way they only do once you clear the light. Then she started talking again, answering the questions I had, because I had questions. I did not ask about weapons. I did not ask about faster-than-light travel, though I wanted to. What I asked was whether the Concord had a functioning way to resolve resource conflicts between member species, because in my experience, that was where every cooperative structure eventually broke. She was quiet for a moment. "You did not ask what most species ask at this stage of contact," she said. "I already know weapons and fast travel exist," I said. "What I want to know is whether the people running the galaxy are any better at running things than the people running mine." Another pause, longer this time. "That is a more sophisticated question than our models predicted for your developmental stage. Your models might need updating," I said. The crash site was a dry wash about a kilometer off the road. Her ship had gone in nose first, and the desert had partially swallowed it. I had to crawl into a bent access port with a flashlight between my teeth, and a basic understanding of Cathari technology arriving in installments through the device still warm in my pocket. She walked me through it over the earpiece, her voice steady, and I moved through the broken interior of something that had traveled between stars and ended up sideways in Arizona, and I found the signal disruptor in a sealed compartment under the navigation bench. I also found the emergency communicator, a second device, flat and smooth, that she told me immediately not to touch. I put it in my other pocket. "Marcus. Contingency," I said. "Using it creates a record. It flags the quarantine violation. The Concord review could. Then we make sure we don't need it," I said. "But I'm not leaving us with nothing." She did not argue, but when I climbed back out into the cool desert dark and walked back to the truck, she was looking at me differently. "You think in contingencies," she said. "Everyone who's survived something does," I said, and started the engine. Back at the apartment, the disruptor deployed, beacon masked. The sky above Tucson was still dark, and the clock read 5:41, and I was thinking about whether I could sleep for an hour when my front door came in. Not knocked, came in. 2 figures, dark suits, moving with the particular economy of people who have done this kind of thing many times. I caught them first as heat shimmer at the edges of my vision, some kind of personal cloaking that bent light the way the portal in my bedroom had bent it. except cruder and more aggressive. Then the field dropped as they moved, and they were simply there, in my living room, armed with things that were shaped like weapons, the way a word in a foreign language sounds like something familiar. Vael Siri could barely stand. She had one hand on the kitchen counter, and the other reaching for something on her suit. I had a cast iron skillet on the stove. What happened next was not clean or impressive. It was just real. The first operative moved left, and I moved the skillet to meet the right side of his head, and the impact did something to a piece of hardware attached to his cloaking device, because the shimmer around him collapsed all at once, and he went sideways into my bookshelf. The second one hit me with something that burned through my left shoulder like a hot wire and dropped me to one knee, and from that knee, I got the taser from the bedside drawer I had already calculated the distance to, and the second one went down and stayed down. 6 seconds. Vael Siri used them. The concussive pulse from her suit's defense module was quiet and thorough. We sat on my kitchen floor. I was leaking the normal color. She was leaking a little blue but holding together. My door was in pieces, and my bookshelf was not going to recover, and the two operatives were breathing but still. "You fought 2 severance soldiers," she said. "I fought 2 people who came into my home uninvited," I said. "I had the better furniture, and I knew the room. They are trained." "So was I said. "It wears off slower than people think." Then I took the communicator out of my pocket and handed it to her, because she needed it, and because that was always what the contingency was for. The Concord response came before dawn. The vessel was invisible above the wash, and silent, and very fast, and I watched from my busted doorway as the light behind my apartment shifted in a way that meant something large had moved through it. They took the senator. They took the severance operatives. And then Vael Siri came back to my door one last time, standing in the gray early light, with her skin settled into a slow, valor-steady amber that felt like warmth even from a distance. "The Concord will review Earth's quarantine status," she said. "Because of tonight, the contact is on record. I cannot promise you the outcome. Will it go badly? Possibly," she said. "Or I will submit 6 years of observational data with tonight's events appended, unredacted. What will you tell them?" She looked at my apartment, at the improvised medical tools drying on the counter, at the skillet, at the door, at me. "That humanity is not what the models predicted," she said. "That your capacity for harm and your capacity for care are not opposing forces. They are the same force, aimed by something the Concord does not yet have a word for." "What's that?" "Choice," she said. "Not instinct toward aggression, not instinct toward cooperation. A constant, active, expensive decision about which to be, made fresh in every situation. We assumed developing civilizations operated on fixed behavioral gradients. You appear to have rejected the premise." She stepped back into the light, and the light took her. I stood in my broken doorway while Tucson woke up around me, slow and golden, and completely unaware that anything had happened in the sky above it. My shoulder ached. My floor was a disaster. My coffee was cold again. I went inside, poured the cold coffee out, and made a fresh pot. Somewhere out there, someone was alive because I had a vacuum seal bag, a cast iron skillet, and the habit of keeping a contingency in my pocket. Somewhere up there, a report was being written that might change what happens to 8 billion people who would never know my name. I poured the coffee. I sat down. That felt like enough for 6 in the morning.